you stand in the middle of Times Square and look up, you will be completely blinded by the flawless, manufactured perfection of the multi-billion-dollar luxury beauty industry. You will see 50-foot-tall billboards featuring supermodels with glowing, immaculate skin selling tiny glass bottles of anti-aging serums for $300 a pop. You will see the charismatic, silver-haired CEOs giving polished interviews on financial networks, arrogantly bragging about their record-breaking quarterly profits and their revolutionary skincare empires. But what you don't see, and what they desperately pray you never discover, is where that revolution actually comes from. My name is Victoria. I am not the beautiful, retouched face on the glowing billboard. I am the dangerous mathematical mind inside the sterile glass vial. For 8 years, I worked as a senior chemical engineer for one of the largest luxury cosmetics conglomerates in the world. While the executive board was upstairs popping vintage champagne and celebrating their soaring stock prices, I was locked away 3 floors underground in a pristine, blindingly white laboratory. I didn't wear imported Italian suits. I wore a silver-threaded sterile coat. I manipulated complex molecular structures, stabilizing volatile peptides and engineering the exact chemical reactions that made their supposed miracle creams actually work. I was the undisputed ghost in their machine. I engineered 3 consecutive flagship products that generated over $1.2 billion in global retail sales for the corporation. And in return, the male executives patted me on the head, paid me a perfectly average 6-figure salary, and made absolutely sure my name never, ever appeared on a single press release or patent application. In the world of clinical luxury, the executives firmly believed that the female scientists should be treated like high-functioning factory machinery, highly useful for production, but entirely replaceable, and expected to remain completely silent. They loved my brain, but they fundamentally disrespected my existence. They assumed that because I was quiet, because I preferred the sterile, isolated hum of the lab centrifuges to the aggressive noise of the boardroom, I was incredibly naive. But that arrogant assumption became their absolute fatal miscalculation. Because 2 years ago, I didn't just formulate another successful daily moisturizer. I synthesized the absolute holy grail of cellular regeneration. A proprietary formula so advanced, so aggressively effective, it was mathematically guaranteed to instantly monopolize the entire global market. And that is exactly when the corporation decided to cross the ultimate point of no return. They didn't just try to hide me in the basement anymore. They stole my intellectual property. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever poured your absolute soul into building something brilliant, only to watch a mediocre manager or a ruthless corporation steal the credit and the profit, do not look away. Because I am about to show you exactly how I took the ultimate corporate betrayal and used it to systematically bankrupt the very empire that tried to erase me. Welcome back to Scars and Silk. Hit that subscribe button right now, because today, the invisible scientist is tearing down the lab.
It happened at exactly 4:30 a.m. on a Friday. After 3 grueling years of failed trials and hundreds of thousands of microscopic adjustments, the peptide chain finally stabilized in the centrifuge. I watched the data scroll across my monitors, my heart pounding against my ribs in the dead silence of the underground laboratory. I hadn't just created another expensive moisturizer, I had successfully synthesized a biological compound that actively reversed cellular degradation at the molecular level. It wasn't marketing magic, it was undeniable, peer-reviewed mathematics. I knew instantly, with absolute clinical certainty, that the tiny glass vial sitting on my stainless steel counter was worth at a minimum $3 billion. I documented every single step of the process in my encrypted personal logs, secured the physical prototypes, and requested an immediate private meeting with the CEO. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus was a man who wore custom $5,000 Tom Ford suits, possessed a smile perfectly engineered for magazine covers, and fundamentally couldn't pass a high school chemistry exam if his life depended on it. He didn't build things, he exploited the people who did. I sat in his sprawling, glass-walled office and placed the vial on his desk. I walked him through the clinical data, the unprecedented efficacy rates, and the undeniable reality that this formula would completely obliterate our global competitors. For a brief, unguarded second, I saw the raw, predatory greed flash in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a patronizing smile. He told me I had done excellent work for the team, assured me that the legal department would start drafting the patent applications, and promised we would discuss my equity compensation the following week. I walked out of that office feeling a profound sense of validation. I foolishly believed that the undeniable weight of my genius had finally bought my seat at the executive table. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the lab when a company-wide email pinged on my screen. It was a massive, highly produced press release announcing the upcoming launch of their revolutionary new product, the exact formula I had synthesized. I scanned the document, my blood turning to ice. The corporation had expedited the patent through a proxy legal firm. The patent listed Marcus and 2 other male board members as the primary inventors. My name was entirely, surgically erased from the document. I immediately marched up to the executive floor and cornered Marcus in his office, demanding an explanation for the theft. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and gave me that same sickeningly calm smile. "Victoria, please, lower your voice," he said, sliding a copy of my original employment contract across the desk. He tapped a specific paragraph buried on page 42. "Read the intellectual property clause. You used our laboratory. You used our centrifuges. Therefore, under corporate law, we own every single thought that enters your head between the hours of 9 and 5. We own the formula. We own the patent. And frankly, we own you." He looked at me not as a brilliant scientist, but as a defective piece of company equipment that was suddenly malfunctioning. He thought the heavy, suffocating threat of corporate litigation would immediately force me back down into the basement. He had no idea he had just activated an absolute nightmare.
I refused to shrink back into the shadows. I looked Marcus dead in the eye and calmly informed him that I possessed time-stamped, heavily encrypted digital logs of every single molecular iteration on my private servers. I told him I was prepared to take the raw clinical data directly to the federal regulatory boards and the industry press to violently expose the fraudulent nature of his patent. That was the exact moment the velvet rope dropped and the sheer brutal machinery of corporate retaliation was unleashed. When you threaten a billion-dollar cosmetic empire, they do not fight fair. They don't try to debate you on the science. They deploy their capital to completely eradicate your existence. Less than 20 minutes after I walked out of Marcus's office, 2 armed corporate security guards appeared at my underground lab station. They abruptly confiscated my computer, my physical notebooks, and my security clearance. I was escorted out of the glass building through the main lobby, paraded like a common criminal in front of the very colleagues I had worked alongside for 8 years. But the public humiliation was merely their opening move. By 9 a.m. the following morning, I was hit with a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit. The corporation's army of expensive lawyers accused me of violently breaching a draconian non-disclosure agreement, officially alleging that I had attempted to steal their proprietary research. It was a completely fabricated, malicious charge, engineered for one specific purpose: to financially bleed me to death. They knew I didn't have the capital to sustain a prolonged, grueling legal war against a global conglomerate. They intended to drown me in suffocating legal fees until I was forced into absolute terrified submission. And then they executed the final lethal strike. They blacklisted me. When you operate at the absolute highest echelon of chemical engineering and clinical luxury, the network is incredibly small. The executives all play golf at the exact same exclusive country clubs. They sit on the exact same advisory boards. Within 48 hours, I went from being one of the most brilliant, high-performing scientists in the country to being entirely, permanently unemployable. Every single laboratory door slammed shut in my face. Every high-level recruiter suddenly stopped returning my calls. I was quietly and efficiently branded across the entire industry as volatile, litigious, and a massive corporate espionage risk. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a terrifying mountain of legal threats, completely stripped of my income, my professional reputation, and my entire life's work. Marcus had successfully locked me out of the very industry I had spent a decade helping to build. He assumed he'd completely neutralized the threat. He fully believed that by taking my laboratory, my patent, and my paycheck, He had permanently taken my power. But he forgot one microscopic fatal detail. He successfully stole the physical formula, but he couldn't legally steal the neural pathways that originally created it. The corporation had just stolen version 1.0. They had absolutely no idea that my mind was already actively compiling version 2.0.
There is a very specific type of silence that fills an apartment when you realize your entire professional existence has just been legally erased. I sat on my living room floor, completely surrounded by towering stacks of cease and desist letters and aggressive litigation threats, watching Marcus on a financial news network. He was smiling his perfect, manufactured smile, eloquently taking full credit for the revolutionary breakthrough his team had supposedly engineered. For a few days, I let the devastation entirely consume me. I felt the suffocating weight of the billion-dollar machine pressing against my chest. But then I looked up at the massive glass whiteboard leaning against my living room wall, still covered in the complex, sprawling molecular equations I had been working on before I was fired. And in that quiet, sterile moment, the despair completely evaporated, replaced by an absolute, terrifyingly cold clarity. Marcus had successfully stolen the patent. He had successfully stolen the physical prototype. But he was a parasitic executive, not a creator. He possessed a static, frozen piece of intellectual property. He had absolutely no idea that the formula he just launched, the one he was currently spending $50 million to market globally, had a biological ceiling. I knew, because I had built it, that version 1.0 would naturally degrade in efficacy after 9 months of continuous use. It was brilliant, yes, but it was flawed. He had stolen the product, but he had aggressively fired the only engine in the world capable of engineering the upgrade. He didn't realize that in his arrogant rush to destroy me, he had left me with the ultimate competitive advantage. I already knew exactly how to synthesize version 2.0, a cellular compound so terrifyingly advanced, so undeniably superior, that it would instantly render his stolen billion-dollar patent completely and utterly obsolete. I want to stop this story right here for a second. I am speaking directly to the woman watching this who has ever watched someone else take the credit for her late nights, her genius, and her relentless hard work. Maybe you have a manager who presents your ideas as their own, or you are in an industry that constantly forces you to shrink so others can shine. What is the brilliant idea they couldn't steal because it is locked safely inside your mind? Go down to the comments right now and drop a diamond to claim your intellectual power. Let the world know that they can steal the prototype, but they can never steal the architect. And make sure you hit that subscribe button to join the Scars and Silk Empire, because you need to see exactly how you take a devastating corporate theft and turn it into a lethal market weapon. I stopped reading the legal threats. I stopped crying. I didn't need a corporate laboratory to break the market. I just needed raw capital and a sterile environment. I wasn't going to fight Marcus in a rigged courtroom where he had all the financial ammunition. I was going to fight him in the exact place he felt most secure, the open market. The invisible scientist was about to go direct to the consumer.
I liquidated my entire 401k, sold my car, and emptied every single savings account I had. I didn't use that capital to hire a defense attorney to fight Marcus's frivolous lawsuit. I used it to rent a discreet, temperature-controlled commercial warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city, and I meticulously transformed it into a pristine, heavily secured private laboratory. For 6 brutal months, I completely disappeared from the world. I lived in a sterile white coat, surviving on espresso and absolute unfiltered rage. I ran hundreds of microscopic trials, meticulously synthesizing the molecular compound for version 2.0. By the middle of winter, the peptide chain permanently stabilized in my centrifuge. It wasn't just better, it was undeniably, mathematically flawless. Now I had the lethal weapon. I just needed the delivery system.
I knew with absolute certainty that I could never compete with Marcus on the physical shelves of high-end department stores or luxury boutiques. He controlled the retail buyers. He had a $100 million physical distribution network. If I tried to fight him in the pristine aisles of Sephora or Neiman Marcus, his corporate machine would crush me instantly. So I simply refused to play his physical game. I bypassed the retail gatekeepers entirely and built an ultra-minimalist, direct-to-consumer DTC digital empire. I called it Aura Synthetics. I didn't waste a single dollar on celebrity endorsements, supermodels, or 50-foot billboards in Times Square. Instead, I deployed my limited capital into surgical, hyper-targeted digital marketing algorithms. Because I was the architect who had built Marcus's original formula, I knew his customer base more intimately than his own marketing department did. I knew their exact age brackets, their purchasing habits, and their exact pain points. I targeted his loyal demographic with cold, irrefutable, peer-reviewed clinical data. My digital campaigns were sterile, educational, and absolutely ruthless. The messaging was simple. The active ingredient in your current $300 luxury serum biologically degrades after 9 months of use. Here is the undeniable molecular proof, and here is the clinical next-generation upgrade. The internet is a profoundly dangerous place for bloated corporations because it is an absolute meritocracy. Women are not stupid. They can read clinical data when it is presented with transparent clarity. Within 4 weeks, the conversion rates violently exploded. The initial thousands of units I had manufactured completely sold out. We were quietly, mathematically siphoning Marcus's most loyal, high-paying customers, redirecting millions of dollars in revenue from his massive corporate empire directly into my independent digital infrastructure. Marcus was spending a fortune on archaic television commercials trying to drive foot traffic to physical retail stores, completely oblivious to the fact that his exact target audience was being mathematically intercepted and converted on their smartphones in the dead of night. I wasn't just launching a brand, I was executing a highly calculated digital siege, and I was just getting started.
The digital revenue didn't just trickle in, it flooded the servers. Within 6 months, Aura Synthetics had completely bypassed the traditional retail infrastructure and generated over $20 million in liquid cash. I was no longer a struggling, blacklisted scientist hiding in an industrial warehouse. I was a heavily capitalized CEO commanding a highly profitable, self-sustaining digital empire. But I didn't use that $20 million war chest to buy a penthouse, and I certainly didn't use it to hire a legal team to finally fight Marcus in court. Suing him would just be a petty, emotional reaction. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted an execution. How do you kill a multi-billion-dollar corporate giant? You don't try to stab it in the chest. You calmly walk around it and you completely cut off its oxygen supply. Because I was the original architect of Marcus's stolen version 1.0, I possessed intimate, classified knowledge that his own executive board didn't even understand. I knew that his entire billion-dollar cash cow relied on one incredibly rare, highly volatile botanical peptide. And more importantly, I knew that this specific peptide could only be harvested and synthesized by 3 highly specialized biofermentation laboratories located in the Swiss Alps. Corporate executives like Marcus are arrogant, but they are also incredibly lazy. His supply chain managers hadn't bothered to lock those Swiss laboratories into exclusive long-term contracts. They were simply buying the raw material on a quarterly basis, assuming their massive corporate presence guaranteed them priority access forever. It was a fatal, catastrophic structural vulnerability. I took my newly acquired capital, quietly formed an anonymous offshore holding company, and flew directly to Switzerland. I didn't negotiate with the laboratories for a quarterly shipment. I dropped a massive, undeniable sum of liquid cash on their tables and legally purchased the exclusive global rights to their entire biological output for the next 10 years. I bought the farms, I bought the vats, I bought the absolute rights to the only ingredient that made Marcus's empire function. I flew back to my warehouse, sat in my office, and waited.
2 weeks later, the inevitable collapse triggered. When Marcus's automated corporate purchasing software attempted to submit the quarterly reorder for the active ingredient of his flagship product, the system didn't process it. It returned a fatal error. The raw material simply did not exist on the open market anymore. Marcus had spent $50 million running global advertising campaigns for a product he could no longer physically manufacture. His production lines ground to a violent, screeching halt. His international distributor started panicking, and his pristine glass supply chain completely shattered in a matter of days. He thought he was playing a game of legal intimidation against a helpless employee. He had absolutely no idea he was locked in brutal mathematical war of supply chain asphyxiation against the woman who built his machine. He stole my patent, so I legally bought his oxygen.
The financial fallout was swift, violent, and absolutely merciless. Without the proprietary Swiss peptide, Marcus could no longer fulfill his massive international purchase orders. Within 3 weeks, the flagship product entirely vanished from the pristine shelves of global luxury retailers. Wall Street noticed the catastrophic supply chain failure immediately, and the corporation's stock price violently plummeted by 42% in a single afternoon. Desperate, bleeding capital, and facing an immediate mutiny from his furious board of directors, Marcus requested an emergency in-person meeting with the mysterious new owner of the Swiss biofacilities. He was ready to beg, prepared to negotiate a supply contract at any exorbitant price, just to save his collapsing empire. He walked into the sterile, glass-walled conference room in Geneva, sweating straight through his custom Tom Ford suit, clutching a blank corporate check. I was already sitting at the head of the mahogany table, wearing a razor-sharp snow-white blazer. The exact moment his eyes locked onto mine, the arrogant king of cosmetics completely stopped breathing. The color violently drained from his face as the lethal mathematics of his situation finally clicked into his brain. He realized in a fraction of a second that he wasn't negotiating with a foreign supplier, he was unconditionally surrendering to his executioner. He frantically tried to speak, stuttering as he offered me triple the market rate for the peptide. I didn't say a word. I calmly slid his blank check back across the table. I told him I had absolutely zero interest in supplying the raw materials to keep his obsolete, decaying formula on life support. Instead, I opened my briefcase and handed him a heavy stack of legal documents. Because his corporation was now hemorrhaging cash and facing imminent bankruptcy without its flagship product, they desperately needed to liquidate physical assets to survive the quarter. I didn't just kill his product line. I used the massive profits from Aura Synthetics to force a brutal corporate fire sale. I legally purchased his primary, $100 million manufacturing facility for absolute pennies on the dollar, entirely absorbing his pristine production infrastructure so I could scale version 2.0 globally. And my first official act as the new owner of the facility was to ensure Marcus was permanently, aggressively escorted off the premises by the exact same security guards he had used to evict me. To every brilliant woman watching this right now, your mind is the most dangerous, valuable, and heavily contested real estate on the planet. Never let a job title, a mediocre manager, or a legally dubious corporate contract trick you into believing that your genius belongs to the machine. They can steal the paperwork, they can steal the physical prototype, but they can never, ever steal the architect. If this story woke you up today, do not keep it to yourself. Send this video to a woman who is quietly doing all the heavy lifting in the dark and needs to realize her true market value. Go down to the comments and drop a DNA helix so I know the architects are finally taking back their power. And make sure you hit that subscribe button to join the Scores and Silk empire. Because we aren't just creating the formulas in the basement anymore. We own the laboratory.